So I actually filmed this on my nice camera earlier today and then discovered that it didn't record half of it. And I got kind of mad at it and I don't really want to deal with it again. So I'm recording this on my phone. I don't know how the quality is going to turn out, and I feel like I'm gonna look like I'm not even looking at the camera for half of it because there's the camera and like there's my phone screen. Yeah. Okay, so welcome to the first video on Sharks and Stims. Sharks and Stims is a blog that I started last year in 2022 about raising neurodivergent children. I'm sharing my own family's experiences. I hope to share the experiences of other families, and I hope to give tips and advice and share stories to help other families like mine. And with that, I decided that I was going to go ahead and also start a YouTube channel to go along with the blog. If you don't know me, my name is May. I am the neurodivergent mom of an autistic 3.5-year-old that I call E. E was diagnosed with autism at just 21 months old. At the time, he was nonverbal, and he still is 2 years later. I admit that the title of this video is probably pretty clickbaity because, you know, my 1-year-old was diagnosed with autism it's a pretty clickbaity title. But he was technically only a year old. He was just a couple months away from turning 2, but he was technically only a year old. Oh, my dog has decided to join. So if you see movement down here, that would be her. Hi, Panda Moo. Yeah, hi, Panda Moo. Okay, hi. I wanted to share E's story. I do have this all written in a blog post, which I will link in the description box below, so you can actually go through and read E's story and things like that. What? So I want to start with the disclaimer that I am not a medical professional. I am not an early childhood education professional. I am just a mom sharing her family's experiences in hopes of helping other families like mine. My son E was born in the summer of 2019. For the first year of his life, he was a typically developing baby. He hit his milestones on time. We had no developmental concerns about him at all. I mean, we had our struggles like you do in that first year. We had some struggles with breastfeeding and some struggles with sleeping, a little bit of struggles with weight gain. But overall, like, there really wasn't any concerns that we had about him developmentally. Absolutely had no idea that he was going to be diagnosed with autism one day. Oh, here comes the other dog. Now I have two. Yes, I have two Boston Terriers named Panda and Tata, and they are both now basically on my lap. At 1, he was reaching to be picked up. That was kind of his first and only gesture. He had about 4 words that he consistently used. He very consistently used mama, dada, and no, and sometimes you would hear him say book because he loved books. While we had no concerns at that age, things started to slowly change. Well, I guess actually they didn't change, and that was part of the problem. It got to the point where by about 14, 15 months old, E's development kind of stopped. I use the term went stagnant a lot when describing this, when I talk about the story of his regression and his development, and that's pretty much what happened. He just kind of stopped where he was, and he didn't learn any new gestures. There was no showing, no reaching, no whole hand pointing, no requesting help. He didn't pick up any more words. And then he started slowly regressing. And we didn't really notice it was happening when it was happening because it was just such a slow process. And then honestly, we didn't even really accept that it had happened until after he turned 2. But after his development just went stagnant at about 15 months, he just slowly got quieter and quieter. And it got to the point where we realized one day at about 17 months old that we hadn't heard his voice in a while. The only sounds he was really making were whining, crying, grunting, the occasional laugh. He was still reaching to be picked up, but he had no other nonverbal communication skills, really, no other gestures. So this was when the biggest concerns started, because at this point, I thought we were dealing with a speech delay or a language delay, a communication delay. I know that, you know, developmental delays happen in kids, you know, and we're also, hello, Panda Moo. At this point, it's early 2021, and, you know, we've been in the middle of a pandemic for a year. And at the time, we were actually living in Germany. E was actually born in Germany. Forgot to throw that tidbit of information out there. We were an American military family, and at the time we were stationed overseas in Europe, and E was born on an American military base. And with this, we did actually have access to American military doctors, including American pediatricians and a number of specialists and things like that. It's early 2021. E is about 18 months old, and we're going in for his 18-month well baby appointment. You know, standard appointment. We ended up not having a 15-month well baby appointment, but even at that age, we weren't concerned because he hadn't regressed yet. But yeah, we were in the middle of a pandemic, and I knew that that was impacting child development, and I have a couple of nephews who have had speech delays in the past. I have 1,000 nieces and nephews, and, you know, they've all had their own paths in terms of child development. For the most part, they've all been pretty typically developing, but I do have a couple of nephews who have had speech delays in the past. I wasn't a stranger to the possibility of a speech delay. I knew that there was a chance that that could happen. And that's what I thought we were dealing with. So we go to his 18-month well baby appointment, and his pediatrician looks at us and goes, "Have you ever been concerned about autism?" At the time, we were like, no, never thought about our son potentially having autism. That was just not a thought in our mind. We didn't know what autism looked like in toddlers, but both my husband, Sam, and I, at the time, had met and interacted with a few autistic individuals. Now we've definitely interacted with more. Caffeine. It's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon while I'm filming this, and he is having his tablet time, and I'm really enjoying second monster of the day. Caffeine is the lifeblood of a special needs parent. His pediatrician looked at us and asked if we had ever been concerned about autism. And the reason for this is because at this appointment, we realized that E had more than just a speech delay. He was actually delayed in a few areas of development. Just how delayed he was and in what areas we weren't exactly sure. This wasn't like a full developmental evaluation or anything like that. It was just a well baby checkup. And with this, the pediatrician gave us a referral to an audiologist, which is it's a very standard practice when you have concerns about a child's development with their communication and language skills, because kids are really good at masking hearing problems, and hearing problems can greatly impact a child's language development. Dogs have been moved to another room, so their incessant chewing isn't driving me up a wall. EDIS is the military's version of an early intervention program for families like ours that are in areas both in and out of the US that might not have as great of access to early intervention services. They're especially prevalent overseas in American military communities. It was essentially just an early intervention program, like really any other early intervention program here in the US. We got into contact with EDIS, and they did a full evaluation of E for services to see if he qualified for an IFSP. That is an individual family service plan, I believe. I might be wrong on that. And it was through this that we realized how delayed E actually was. E was delayed in pretty much every area of development. We didn't realize how delayed he was until we had this evaluation and we got the results, and it was such an eye-opening experience for us to know that he was so much behind his peers, and we didn't know. Early intervention programs do not do autism evaluations. That's not what they're there for. They look for current developmental delays or in other kinds of struggles in a child and offer services based on what that child needs. So while we did mention to Edis that his pediatrician had brought up autism. They rightfully did not confirm or deny any of our suspicions. That's not what they're there for. That's not their area of expertise. But they did offer to help us get a referral to a developmental pediatrician if we wanted. We started services with Edis. And at this point, it's, I want to say February or March of 2021. Still pretty early in the year. He is about 19, 20 months old. And we're actually due to move back to the US later that year. If you don't really know how like the moving process works for US military families, we don't get to pick where we go generally. I mean, there are kind of some exceptions to that rule, and I'm not going to get into all that because that's not obviously what this video is about, but we don't get to choose where we go. But the military does generally try to place families in areas where they have the resources that they need, especially if you have a family member with a disability or developmental delays, special needs, chronic illnesses, those kinds of things. There are programs that your family can be entered into that makes sure that you get sent to a place that has the accommodations that your family needs. So we were already being entered into this program because of E's special education needs, because working with Edis was, in a way, a special education program. You know, talking about this never quite gets any easier, telling this story. I mean, it does, but it doesn't, and I don't even know if I'm gonna include this little tangent into the video, but I still feel pretty raw telling you stories sometimes and laying out his history and everything like that. Which, if you're finding this video and you know who I am, you know like my actual legal name, because May is not my legal name, but it is what I go by online, and you know E's actual name, please refrain from sharing it. I am trying to share his experiences and our family's experiences in the best way I can without compromising his privacy. So we were only a few months away from moving back to the US, and we wanted to make sure that we ended up in a place that was going to have the services that our son needed. Every parent wants to make sure that, you know, they live in an area that can provide the things that their child needs. During this evaluation process, as I started to research more about speech delays and communication delays and developmental delays in general, I started reading more and more about autism, and things started clicking. Things started making a lot of sense, actually. And it wasn't long before Sam and I kind of realized that we were pretty sure our son was autistic. There really wasn't much of a doubt in our minds at that point that he was almost definitely autistic. Which, I mean, he is. Obviously, that's the whole reason I'm sitting here telling you all of this and recording this video. I now have a fidget in my hands because sometimes I also need fidgets and things to mess with. Hi, because I'm also neurodivergent. That's a whole nother story. Okay, I gotta try and finish recording this so I can let my kid out of his room. So at this point in time, we're pretty sure E is autistic. Like there really isn't much of a doubt in our minds that he is. And we wanted to at least get our concerns listed in his medical records because we knew that wait lists in the US are long, and we at least wanted our concerns to be actually documented. This is gonna take me forever because I keep getting distracted. This is why I originally recorded this while he was at school, and then my camera decided not to record half of it. So, great. Okay. So we took Edis up on their offer of helping us get a referral to a developmental pediatrician. Now, the area we were in Germany, it's a US military community there that has like a full army hospital along with other clinics at other bases, and there were a couple of developmental pediatricians stationed at these bases and hospitals. So we were actually really lucky that there was basically no wait lists to get in to see the developmental pediatrician. That's not the case in most of the world, especially in the US. Wait lists for autism evaluations can be upwards of a year, and we got so lucky that we were able to get into a developmental pediatrician within a few weeks of requesting the referral. At this point in time, E is about 21 months old. We've recently started services with early intervention. We're actually doing something called the Play Project, which was kind of a parent training, intensive therapy kind of program. I don't know exactly the best way to describe it. I think it was the right choice for us at the time. It's not something I think I would do now, but I think it was definitely the right choice for us and for E at the time, especially with the pandemic and everything that was going on. So E has started services, and he's now 21 months old. We are 3 months away from his second birthday, and we go in for an autism evaluation. Looking back at just how young he was still shocks me, because he was a baby, it feels like. I have a picture of him in the room before the evaluation began that I sent to a few friends over Snapchat, and I look at that picture and I just see how little he was, and it blows my mind that even at such a young age we were able to clearly see these signs of autism in him. Now, autism generally can't be diagnosed before 18 months, and even that's really early. And at the time, I didn't really understand how autism could be diagnosed in a kid so young. Now I understand. Now I know the signs, and I see exactly why and how he was so easily able to be diagnosed at such a young age. And I'll go into his specific signs of autism a little bit deeper in just a moment. We're seeing the developmental pediatrician, and we had a little bit of a different experience, I think, with his evaluation, because a lot of the times when kids go through an autism evaluation, there's some kind of standardized assessment or test that the evaluator may use to help make sure that the kid is hitting all of the necessary areas for a diagnosis. DSM-5 does have multiple requirements that somebody has to hit to receive it, to be diagnosed with autism. So oftentimes there is some kind of standardized assessment to make sure that the individual is hitting all of those areas. We didn't really have that. At least if the doctor was doing some kind of standardized assessment, we didn't notice her filling anything out. That is pretty common in autism evaluations, and they also commonly last up to 3-4 hours, which is wild to me. E was diagnosed in under an hour, which I feel like that sounds wild, because if these evaluations often take 3-4 hours, how could my kid be diagnosed in under an hour? It was pretty clear. For us, our evaluation was a combination of the developmental pediatrician observing the way that we interacted with E, attempting to interact with him herself, and asking us questions. Before the evaluation, we had already filled out what felt like 1 million forms and questionnaires, and already gave them so much information about him and his development and his daily habits and things like that. So between all of the questionnaires, the observations that the developmental pediatrician made herself, and then also the questions that were asked and answered during the evaluation, E was able to be diagnosed with autism in under an hour. She said that she pretty much personally witnessed him exhibit every characteristic needed for a diagnosis. I will never forget her voice looking at us and telling us, "I am diagnosing him with autism." That was such a turning point in our lives. That is an appointment that I will never forget. Talking about this always just gets me and makes me kind of emotional, and I'm trying to not be a mess. I'm trying not to stare at this as I sit here and fidget with it, but it's more of a visual fidget anyway, so this probably isn't the best fidget for me to mess with. I've actually got E's box. Please stop. I've got E's box of sensory toys next to me as you hear a baby toy go off. to me, I'm gonna fidget with one of his little Rubik's Cubes now. E was diagnosed with autism at just 21 months old. The developmental pediatrician ended up actually leaving the room to go and grab some paperwork because military related things. And she gave us that chance to sit and talk, both my husband Sam and I. She gave us that chance to kind of sit and talk and come up with any questions that we might immediately have for her. She came back after about 15 minutes with all the paperwork and stuff, and we asked a couple of questions we had, but at the time we really didn't have too many questions because we just didn't. I mean, in some ways we were in shock, but we weren't. Like, we expected it. We went into this appointment, into this evaluation, expecting him to be diagnosed, or for them to say, or for maybe them to say, you know, we don't want to diagnose him right now, but yes, he is showing signs. Like, we expected it, but it was still a shock to us because, I mean, our baby had just been diagnosed with a developmental disability. We were just told that our son is disabled. And that's a shock to any parent, whether you expect it or not. To further explain why E especially was so easily diagnosed with autism at such a young age, it means that I have to talk about some of the signs of autism and what autism is. Autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disability that is characterized by delays or deficits in social communication. That's like a mouthful of, you know, fancy terms and things like that. And there's so much more to autism than just that. And those are, you know, like the medical model words about autism, talking about developmental delays and deficits and disorders and things like that. And we know more about autism now and know that it's a neurotype and that it has to do with the way that somebody's brain is wired. And it's not necessarily about delays or deficits. It's more about differences in like social communication. But when it comes to autistic toddlers, it really is more about delays and deficits, because when it comes to young autistic kids, it's more about the skills they're lacking compared to their neurotypical peers that give the biggest signs or red flags or anything like that when looking at a child's development. So what this meant for E specifically was that he had no communication skills, basically. I mean, at this point, he had regressed and lost his words. He wasn't even babbling at this point. He was only grunting, whining, crying, occasional laugh. He also had no nonverbal communication skills other than reaching to be picked up. That was his only gesture. If he wanted to be picked up, he would raise his arms and that was it. He wasn't pointing. He didn't make eye contact, which is expected in neurotypical kids. He had basically no social communication skills. He had no way of communicating his wants and needs to us. There was nothing. We were struggling so hard with finding ways to interact with him because we couldn't communicate with him. He didn't understand what we were saying. We weren't understanding how he was trying to communicate, and there was just this major disconnect between us and our little toddler because we couldn't communicate with him, and that was the biggest struggle. Now, social communication delays can look different in different children. Children can be very verbal, like have great vocabularies and speak in full sentences, and still have social communication delays. Social communication is not the same as being social or communication. It's this whole kind of area of development. Again, I am not a professional at this, so I may be butchering some of these terms and words and things like that. I will try and include resources in the description box that talk about like social communication and what autism is and things like that. This is just me sharing the signs that my son specifically showed and why he was able to be diagnosed with autism at just 21 months old. So along with pretty severe social communication delays, E also had a lot of repetitive movements and no play skills, basically. His repetitive movements were his play skills. Now, toddlers are these interesting little creatures that are just constantly sensory seeking, doing things that adults determine is weird because society says these things are weird, but toddlers don't care because they're toddlers, so they do these things that we think are weird. So toddlers doing repetitive movements is a very normal thing. You know, toddlers rock back and forth. They like to swing. You know, they might spin in circles sometimes or run back and forth across the room. And this isn't concerning in most cases. Now, it becomes concerning when these repetitive movements are the only way a kid can play, or when these repetitive movements are impacting a child's ability to function on a day-to-day basis. This was the case in both ways for E. He had no other play skills. He could not stack blocks. He could not scribble with crayons. He had no pretend play skills. He could not roll cars on the ground. The only play skills he had were opening and closing books. He loved to flip through the pages of books. Not even necessarily to look at the pictures, but just to flip through the pages and go through that motion. He would open and close cabinets. He would put things in containers and take things out of them. And that was pretty much it. That was really how he played with things. Oh, he would also pace back and forth, a lot of pacing. He would do a lot of pacing, and he still actually does a lot of pacing. So those repetitive movements were concerning because he didn't have other play skills, and he was doing these movements for literally hours a day. I mean, he had no other way to play, and he's a toddler who wants to play, so he's gonna do what he can to play and entertain himself, and that was repetitive movements. And it would get to the point where when we needed him to, you know, stop opening and closing a cabinet so we could put him down for a nap or eat a meal, he would have a meltdown. I'm not going to go into much about meltdowns versus like tantrums and the differences there. Maybe I'll do a separate video one day or blog post or something about the difference. But a meltdown is not a tantrum. A meltdown is something that a child cannot control. It is not a child being upset because they're being told no or anything like that. It is a child who is unable to regulate their emotions and are reacting in the only way that their little body really knows how. So when we would try to stop E from doing these repetitive movements to do things like eat or sleep or, you know, go on into the car or anything like that, it would cause meltdowns, and that was impacting his daily functioning. On top of these repetitive movements and delay in play skills, his delays in social communication, E also had very strong sensory needs starting at a young age. Toddlers are naturally very sensory seeking little creatures. That's how they learn. That's just toddlers. E was even more so. He needed sensory input to function. He needed to fall asleep. He needed to be rocked and have white noise and have this vibrating stick that I would hold against his back and have a weighted blanket and have like tight, you know, hugs and squeezes. And it took so much to help him fall asleep, to help him calm down, to help him function. He needed sensory input to function so much more than your typical toddler. So those were his three biggest signs. Was the social communication delays, which are the singular biggest sign of autism, the repetitive movements that were impacting his daily functioning and the only way that he could play, his high sensory needs, which were higher than your average toddler. And there were a few other things about like rigid routines and intense interests and things like that, but I don't want to go into all of this. I might do like a separate video talking about his specific signs, or just like signs of autism in toddlers in general, but those were kind of the biggest reasons why he was diagnosed so young, because these things were just so obvious compared to other toddlers his age. That's the thing about diagnosing autism in toddlers, is it really is about the skills they lack rather than the things that they're doing. So E was diagnosed. That was all there was to it at that point. He was diagnosed. Again, we weren't surprised. We had expected it. We had a lot of feelings about it. We still have, you know, many feelings thinking about that appointment and things like that. It's a whirlwind of emotions you go through when your child is diagnosed with a disability. I want to clarify that I love my son with every fiber of my being, and I would not change a single thing about him. I would not take away his autism. Would I try to take away some of his struggles? Yes. And a lot of those struggles are caused by like society not being very accommodating to disabled individuals, and that's a whole other tangent that I could rant about for probably hours. but I would not take away my son's autism. His brain is the most incredible little brain in the world in my eyes. Like, he is just this incredible kid who is so smart and kind and loving, and he's just so wonderful, and I would not change him. I would not change a single thing about him. But even loving him as he is and knowing now that I wouldn't take away his autism, it's still gut-wrenching to have your child be diagnosed with a disability because there's such a big fear of the unknown. When it comes to parenting, there's always a fear of the unknown. You know, you're never gonna know what's gonna happen with your kids. You don't know their future. That's life. But when you have a child with a disability, you know that they're gonna struggle more than typical kids. And that scared me so much. And I know that that scared my husband, and I know that that's kind of the scariest thought for parents of autistic kids, is knowing that our children are going to struggle more than other children, and not knowing how to help them, not knowing how to help them in the future, not knowing how to mitigate some of those struggles. So we're having a lot of emotions at this time. And before we left the evaluation appointment, the developmental pediatrician told us that she was referring E for ABA therapy, speech therapy, and occupational therapy, along with wanting us to continue to work with Edis and doing the play project like we were. I want to clarify, I am not for ABA therapy. I am not against ABA therapy. I think that whatever choice a parent makes for their child in terms of therapy services is the choice that they have to make. E has never been in ABA therapy at this point in time. I don't see him going into ABA therapy ever, but I also, again, don't know the future. I know that there are areas in the US especially where ABA is really the only service that kids can get for some of their delays and their struggles and stuff. And there are times where parents have to make the decision to put their child in ABA therapy because of safety concerns or things like that. Again, I don't want to go into the debate of ABA therapy in this video. That's, again, a whole thing. I also don't want to go into all of the reasons why, you know, we've chosen specific therapies for E and decided against other therapies. That might be a whole other video talking about our experiences with like choosing therapists and things like that. He was referred for ABA therapy, but my husband and I, after sitting and talking about everything, all of our options, we decided that we didn't want to put him in ABA therapy because he was already, you know, we were already doing the play project, which was like 15 to 20 hours a month or a week at home, working with him ourselves. And then we wanted to do the targeted therapies of speech therapy and occupational therapy. And we didn't want to throw 20 plus hours of ABA therapy on top of that. He wasn't even 2 yet. I mean, that's still a lot of therapy now at 3.5 for him to, you know, have, you know, similar amounts of therapy and things like that. At 21 months old, that was just too much on him, too much on us. So we decided against putting him in ABA therapy at the time. And then we started private speech and occupational therapy, and we continued going down that same path until it was time for us to move back to the US. As time goes on, my husband eventually receives the assignment for his next base, which is here in Omaha, Nebraska, which is where we are now. Nebraska does not have great services overall for autistic kids. It's not a great state for families of autistic kids. But Omaha specifically actually has a really thriving medical community and has a lot of opportunities and services for autistic kids. So while I would not recommend other areas of Nebraska for families of autistic kids, Omaha is pretty solid. We actually really enjoy it here. And I am very thankful for the variety of services that E has access to here. And I'm honestly glad that we ended up here. So as we're preparing for this move, we're just continuing with E's therapies, trying to help him with his developmental delays, trying to help him learn how to communicate with us. And a lot of it was also us learning how to interact with him. That is something I'm very thankful that we started with very early, was we didn't try and bring him into our world. We tried to insert ourselves into his world. That made the biggest difference for him, for us, for our family. I am so thankful that we didn't try to make him act like a neurotypical kid, because that's not who he is. He's not neurotypical. He is a neurodivergent child, and pretty quickly we accepted that, and we realized that when it came to communicating with him and interacting with him, it wasn't going to look like it did for other kids. So we learned how to insert ourselves into his world, and that was really what we focused on at first. And I'm so thankful that we did, because we were able to learn how to interact with him, and that kind of created the whole foundation for all of the work we've done over the past 2 years since he was diagnosed. So at this point, it's the end of 2021. We leave Germany. We spent the holidays with family, and then early 2022, we're here in Omaha. Pretty quickly, I got to work trying to get E set back up with his services. I didn't want him out of therapy for very long. We'd had a nice little break visiting family, but I wanted him back into his therapies. I wanted to get him established with early intervention here, and I wanted to get the ball rolling on everything. Early intervention is a little different depending on where you live, depending on like what state you're in, what county and city and things like that. But in the state of Nebraska, early intervention goes through the local school districts. So whatever school district your child is zoned for where you live is the school district that also handles their early intervention services. Now, early intervention services are for children from birth to age 3. And at the time that we got to Omaha, E is about 2.5. So he's pretty close to aging out of EI, but knowing that we were going to be working with the same school district that would be handling his special education services after he turned 3, we went ahead and got him evaluated and started with early intervention and started receiving services a couple times a month through them. Now, this was honestly more of a transitional kind of phase, because he didn't have very long to receive services before he aged out. So a lot of what he did receive was kind of a transition into their special education preschool system. We still wanted to go ahead and get him started in the school district. So we got that set up, and then we wanted to also get him started on his private therapies again. Again, not doing ABA therapy, just wanted to do speech and occupational therapy again. We kind of got lucky in Germany where like the perfect therapy practices or the perfect therapist just kind of fell into our laps. Like we just immediately got lucky with a couple of amazing providers who just clicked with him and did so well with E, and we got really lucky with them. Honestly, I kind of thought that would happen again when we came to Omaha, which was foolish looking back at it. Now I really should have been more proactive and done even more research than I had. We were assigned a therapy clinic when the referral was put through, and it was not the right fit for E. They had more of a behavioral based kind of approach, and that's just not really what works for E. And after a very bad session, I might tell this story and talk more about our experiences with therapy and different clinics and therapists and things like that in a separate video, but we pulled him from that therapy clinic because it just was not a good fit, and I had to do more research, and we were actually able to find a couple of really great therapy clinics to start him in occupational therapy and speech therapy. So that actually kind of leads us to where we are now. He turned 3. He started in a special education preschool class in our local school district, and we love his school, his teachers, his SLPs, his paras. I just absolutely love and adore his school, and I'm so thankful that we actually ended up in this specific school district zoned for this specific school. It's now 2023, April of 2023. It's been 2 years since he was diagnosed with autism. He was actually diagnosed during Autism Acceptance Awareness Month, which I've always thought was kind of cool that he was diagnosed in April, and now it's once again April, and it's been 2 years. He's actually about to finish his first year of preschool, and I am so thankful that he was able to be in this class with these teachers and these kids, and he's made so much progress this school year, and I'm so excited to see how much progress he makes next school year. He is still receiving both speech and occupational therapy at this point in time. He Actually, we are starting with a new speech therapy clinic because we had scheduling issues with the last therapy clinic. They were great, you know, therapists were great and everything, but there were just staffing and scheduling issues that caused us to have to search for a different speech clinic. We're still with the same occupational therapy clinic, the second one that we tried here in Omaha, and they are incredible. And then we're also actually about to have E evaluated for physical therapy, which will be a new therapy experience for us. And I don't want to go too far into that because we don't really know, obviously, at this point in time what the results of the PT evaluation are going to be. But we suspect that he needs PT, so he's potentially going to start PT in the next few weeks. So that's, you know, kind of where we are now in our journey. E is, again, he's 3.5, he'll be 4 in just a couple of months, and he is still nonverbal. He's got a handful of words, and he does make a lot of noise. He's a very talkative kid. He tries so hard to talk to us, and he does, I think he has about 13 words now. But the vast majority of his communication skills are not verbal. Now, a lot of autistic individuals and their families prefer the term non-speaking over nonverbal, and that's great for them. We prefer the term nonverbal just because we think that that's what works best for E. E is a very visual kid, and most of the communication we do with him is through visual means, whether that's like communication cards, visual schedules, visual cues in different ways. We really rely heavily on visual communication with him. And so because that the bulk of his communication is through visual means rather than verbal, we prefer the term nonverbal for him. Grown so much in the last couple of years. I mean, all kids grow over time and everything, but when you have a kid with developmental delays and you see them making this progress that's often slower than typical kids, and you know, they need a lot of help to make this progress, it just feels so incredible to watch them grow and learn and develop. E is such an incredible kid, and he's so intelligent. It's incredible watching his little mind work. He can't communicate with us verbally, but he can tell me that 3 + 4 = 7. And he does. He tells us these things all the time, and it's just so incredible. That's been E's journey so far. E's journey is never ending. This is his story. This is his life. He's going to be autistic for the rest of his life. So obviously this isn't the end of his story by any means, because he's going to continue to live and grow and develop, and his story and his journey will continue. And I'm really excited to continue to share our family's experiences and his journey. I do a lot of updates on my Instagram quite a bit, actually, and that's just E's Autism Journey. Super simple username, but you can follow us there and get, honestly, kind of daily, weekly updates on E and how he's doing, and, you know, different things that our family is going through. At this point in time, E's journey isn't even just his journey. It's our whole family's journey. Thanks to my son, I was able to realize that I am also neurodivergent. I highly suspect actually that I am autistic. I haven't been formally diagnosed. I'm kind of going through the process of trying to get an evaluation, which if you're an adult looking at an adult autism evaluation, you know that that's not always particularly easy. But I am 99% sure that I am autistic, which self-diagnosis is valid in the autism community, especially for autistic adults who struggle to obtain a formal diagnosis. But I don't currently feel comfortable actually claiming like a self-diagnosis of autism, but I happily claim that I am neurodivergent because I very much am. E's journey of being diagnosed with autism and going through life has led to my own journey of discovering my own neurodivergence. And my husband, Sam, also suspects that he is also neurodivergent. We both actually suspect that we also have ADHD. So it really has become our whole family's journey rather than just E's journey. So I think that is all for this video for today. I will link my social media below. I will link the Sharks and Stims blog, including the link to E's written out story that I have written on the blog. I will also include some resources for parents that are concerned that their child is showing signs of autism. I may also link some books about autism for anyone who wants to learn more about it. thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.